Welcome back, deep divers. Ready for another case that'll keep you guessing?
Always.
Good, because today we're diving into one that captivated the nation. The disappearance of Laci Peterson.
Oh, this one is a classic.
It really is. We've got excerpts from Wikipedia about Laci Peterson, the murder investigation, even a bit about the TV movie they made.
The whole thing was just wild. So many twists and turns.
Exactly. And that's why we're here to give you all the key details, the important stuff, without getting bogged down in every little thing.
Yeah, just the good stuff.
So let's set the scene. Modesto, California, Christmas Eve, 2002.
Holiday season can't get much more tragic.
Right. Laci Peterson, 27 years old, 8 months pregnant, excited to be a mom, disappears.
Just vanishes.
And it's not just a simple missing person case. There are these odd details that don't add up.
Right from the start.
Her husband, Scott, says he was fishing at Berkeley Marina.
90 miles away.
90 miles. Imagine that drive, especially when your wife is 8 months pregnant and home alone.
Yeah, that's a long way to go fishing.
Then their neighbor finds their dog, Mackenzie, just wandering around the neighborhood.
With his leash still attached.
And when they check the Petersons' house, Laci's purse, keys, wallet, all still there.
Oh.
Yeah, major red flags popping up already. Missing pregnant wife, husband miles away, dog on the loose. Something's not right.
Not right at all. It's like something straight out of a movie.
And as if things couldn't get weirder, Scott's behavior throughout the investigation just adds fuel to the fire.
Yeah, his demeanor was strange, to say the least.
Oddly calm, almost detached.
Not how you'd expect a worried husband to act when his pregnant wife is missing, right?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then comes a bombshell, the affair.
Oh, yeah. That was a big one.
He was seeing another woman, Amber Frey, a massage therapist, who had no clue Scott was even married.
What a plot twist.
Talk about a scandal.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, back then, the image of the grieving husband held a lot of weight in the public eye.
Absolutely. It played a huge part in how people viewed the case initially.
So when the affair came out, it shattered that image.
People went from sympathy to suspicion overnight.
So this other woman, Amber Frey, ends up being a crucial part of the investigation.
Absolutely vital.
The police actually asked her to record her phone calls with Scott, hoping he might slip up, say something incriminating.
Wow, they used his girlfriend as bait.
Talk about a risky move, straight out of a crime drama. But did he confess?
No confession, but something even more chilling came out of those recordings.
Even more chilling. Go on.
Scott told Amber he had lost his wife.
He said what?
He said he'd lost his wife weeks before Laci actually disappeared.
Wow, that sends chills down my spine. So at this point, the case explodes.
Oh yeah, it becomes a national obsession. Media frenzy, everyone talking about it, speculating.
You imagine the pressure, the scrutiny?
It was intense. And Laci's family, who initially supported Scott, they completely withdrew their support once the news of the affair and his strange behavior got out.
I can only imagine the turmoil they were going through.
It must have been devastating.
First, the fear and uncertainty of Laci being missing. Then the betrayal of Scott's infidelity, all while desperately hoping for her safe return. Then, in April 2003, 4 months after Laci vanished, there's a horrifying discovery.
A turning point in the case.
Tell us what happened.
A little boy's body washes ashore in the San Francisco Bay.
Oh, no.
And then a few miles away, they find the badly decomposed remains of a woman.
This is heartbreaking.
DNA testing confirms it's Laci and her unborn son, Connor.
Just awful. Absolutely tragic.
It was a devastating blow to everyone who had been hoping for a different outcome.
So with this discovery, the investigation shifts gears, right?
Completely. Goes from a missing persons case to a full-blown homicide investigation. And Scott becomes the prime suspect.
So they were already watching him.
They were monitoring him, yes, and it seemed like he might have been planning to run to Mexico.
Seriously?
Yeah, they arrested him just days after Laci and Connor's remains were found.
So was there anything concrete tying him to the murders? Like a smoking gun?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. There was no direct forensic evidence linking Scott to the crime scene. No murder weapon, no fingerprints.
So how do they build a case against him?
The prosecution relied heavily on what's called circumstantial evidence.
Okay, for those of us who don't spend all our time in courtrooms, break that down for us.
Think of it like a puzzle. There's no one piece that definitively proves Scott did it, but when you start putting all the pieces together...
The affair, the lies, the strange behavior.
Exactly. It starts to point in his direction.
Okay, I see. So what were some of the puzzle pieces the prosecution focused on?
Well, when they arrested Scott, He had dyed his hair blonde.
Dyed his hair.
Yeah, he had thousands of dollars in cash on him, camping gear, even his brother's driver's license.
Hold on. They find Laci's body, and he's out there dyeing his hair and packing wads of cash.
It certainly raised some eyebrows.
What was he thinking?
That's what the prosecution wanted the jury to think about. They argued Scott was trying to flee to Mexico.
And they thought he used those homemade anchors to weigh Laci's body down in the bay.
Remember, her body was found not far from where he claimed he'd been fishing that day.
That is a lot of suspicious activity to explain away. So how does Scott and his defense team counter all of this? What was their side of the story?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting, and we'll dive into all of that right after we keep going. So Scott's lawyers, they basically argued that the whole prosecution's case was all smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors, huh?
Yeah, they kept saying, look, there's no direct forensic evidence, nothing that actually puts Scott at the crime scene.
No fingerprints, no DNA, that kind of thing.
Exactly. No murder weapon, those concrete anchors they talked about, never found.
And the hair they found on his boat.
They argued it could have gotten there any time. Laci had been on the boat with him before. It wasn't proof of anything.
So basically the defense was saying, yeah, it looks bad, but looking bad isn't proof.
That was their main point. They also tried to poke holes in the prosecution's timeline, you know?
Like maybe things didn't happen exactly the way they said they did.
Right. They pointed to other potential leads that they felt weren't fully investigated.
Oh, like what?
There was this woman who was accused of stealing checks from the Petersons' mailbox.
Around the time Laci disappeared.
Yeah, right around then. And there was some missing evidence, too.
Missing evidence? That doesn't sound good.
A recording of an early interview with Scott, supposedly lost because the batteries in the tape recorder died.
Seriously. Come on, dead batteries. In this day and age, that sounds a little too convenient.
Right. It does make you wonder. So basically, the defense was throwing out a bunch of what-ifs, hoping something would stick.
Did they have any actual alternative theories or suspects?
Not really, no. They suggested maybe Laci had been kidnapped, held captive, and then, you know...
Killed later, after she gave birth.
Yeah, something like that. But they didn't have any real evidence to back that up.
So it sounds like the trial was a battle of narratives. The prosecution painting Scott as this cold, calculating husband who wanted to escape, and the defense saying, hey, wait a minute, there's no proof, you're just filling in the blanks.
That's a good way to put it. And the media, they were all over it.
This is 2004, right? Before social media really took off.
Yeah, but everyone was following the trial, talking about it, debating Scott's guilt or innocence. It was a national obsession.
It's hard to imagine that level of media saturation today.
It was a different time. But anyway, in the end, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty on both counts of murder.
Wow. Even with all the doubt, the lack of direct evidence, they still convicted him.
It was a huge decision. First-degree murder for Laci, second-degree for Connor.
And the sentence.
Death. He was sentenced to death in 2005 and sent to San Quentin to await execution.
So a tragic ending to a tragic story.
And the case had a big impact on the legal landscape, too. It led to the passage of the Unborn Victims of Violence Act.
Also known as Laci and Connor's Law.
Right. It recognizes a fetus as a separate victim in violent crimes against pregnant women.
So Laci and Connor's deaths, as horrible as they were, they sparked a legal change that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. But even with the verdict, the sentencing, the story wasn't over.
There's more.
Oh, there's always more. This case is full of twists and turns, even years later.
Scott always maintained his innocence, right?
He did. And his legal team has been fighting to get his conviction overturned ever since.
So what happened after the trial? Were there any big developments that could potentially change things?
The first big one came in 2020.
Okay, what happened?
The California Supreme Court overturned Scott's death sentence.
They did? Why?
Issues with the jury selection during his trial. They said potential jurors who opposed the death penalty were improperly excluded.
So it wasn't a fair trial.
That's what the court decided. They said it violated Scott's right to a fair trial.
So he was off death row, but still convicted, right?
Yeah, still facing life in prison. But his team, they kept fighting. They filed appeals, even a habeas corpus petition.
Hold on, habeas corpus. You're losing me.
It basically means produce the body. It's a way for someone who's been imprisoned to argue that their detention is unlawful.
Okay, so in Scott's case...
It allowed his team to present new evidence that wasn't available during the original trial.
hoping to prove his innocence, or at least get a new trial.
Exactly. It's like a legal Hail Mary.
So what kind of new evidence did they have?
They had a few things. An allegation that one of the jurors lied on her jury application.
Interesting.
And then there were witnesses who claimed they saw Laci alive.
Alive? but after she was supposed to have disappeared.
That's what they say. But the prosecution argued these sightings were unreliable, couldn't be corroborated.
You know, this case was all over the news. People probably thought they saw Laci everywhere.
It happens. Mistaken identity, people wanting to be part of the story, who knows?
So those leads probably didn't go anywhere.
Not really. But then the Ellie Innocence Project got involved.
Now that's a big deal. They don't just take on any case.
They believe there's a good chance of a wrongful conviction.
And they filed a request for more DNA testing.
On evidence from the crime scene, yeah. Early 2024.
They were hoping to find DNA from someone else, someone who might have actually been involved.
Exactly. Remember those concrete anchors?
That were never found.
Right. They wanted to analyze materials from Scott's boat, his warehouse, hoping to find DNA that would either link him to the anchors.
Or rule them out.
Even better. But the prosecution, they weren't happy about it.
They didn't want the evidence retested.
They pushed back, said the DNA had already been thoroughly examined. Scott's team was just grasping at straws.
So basically, a legal tug of war.
You could say that. One side wants to use new technology to re-examine the evidence. The other side says, we already did that, move on.
Did the judge make a decision on the DNA testing?
It was a partial win for Scott's team. The judge said yes to testing, but only on one specific piece of evidence.
What was it?
A piece of duct tape that was found on Laci's pants during the autopsy.
Okay, and they're looking for
Any DNA that doesn't belong to Laci or Scott.
a glimmer of hope for the defense, I guess? But what about all the other evidence? Did the judge shut that down?
For now, yes. But then, and this is where things get really interesting, Scott's defense team got another win.
Another one.
In October 2024, just a few weeks ago, the judge granted their request for post-conviction discovery.
Okay, you're going to have to explain that one.
Basically, it means Scott's lawyers get to see if the police or prosecutors held onto any evidence that wasn't shown at the original trial.
Stuff that might help prove his innocence.
Exactly.
Wow, that's huge. Are we talking about potentially game-changing evidence here?
That's what Scott's team is hoping for. They're alleging that the prosecution might have withheld crucial information.
Information that could have cast doubt on Scott's guilt.
Exactly. But after all these years, what could they possibly be hiding?
It's hard to imagine.
It could be anything. Witness statements that contradict the prosecution's story, forensic evidence that was never fully analyzed, who knows?
It's like a legal thriller, waiting to see what's in that box.
Right. So much suspense.
So does this mean Scott could actually get a new trial?
It's definitely a possibility. If that DNA testing on the duct tape comes back with someone else's DNA, or if they find something in this post-conviction discovery that was intentionally withheld.
That changes everything.
It could, but for Laci's family, this whole thing must be incredibly painful.
After all these years, having the case dragged back into the spotlight.
It reopens old wounds, brings back all the trauma of losing Laci and Connor. It's a reminder that even with a verdict, the search for truth and justice can go on and on.
This case really shows how our legal system, while it tries to be fair, it's not perfect. New information, new technology, it can change everything, even decades later.
And I think that's what keeps people fascinated by this case. It's a story that stays with you, makes you question what you thought you knew.
All right, so where do we leave off? Oh, yeah, that DNA testing, the duct tape and all that.
Right. The judge agreed to the testing, but only on that one piece of evidence.
That little piece of duct tape.
They're looking for any DNA that doesn't belong to Laci or Scott.
Hoping for a clue, a new lead, something.
Exactly. But all that other evidence the Innocence Project wanted to test, the judge said no for now.
So one small victory for the defense, I guess?
You could say that. But then things took another turn.
There's always another turn with this case.
Isn't there? In October 2024, just a few weeks ago, the judge granted the defense's request for post-conviction discovery.
Now, hold on. You're going to have to explain that one for me.
It means basically Scott's lawyers can see if the police or prosecutors held back any evidence.
Evidence that wasn't shown at the trial.
Right, stuff that could potentially help prove his innocence.
So they're basically saying, maybe there's something you guys missed, something that could change everything. After all these years, what could they possibly find?
It's hard to say, really. Could be witness statements that don't match up with the prosecution's case. Could be forensic evidence that was never fully analyzed. Who knows?
It's like they're opening a time capsule from 2004, hoping it holds the key to the truth.
It's a long shot, but you never know.
So does this mean a new trial for Scott Peterson is actually possible?
It's definitely on the table. If that DNA test on the duct tape shows someone else's DNA, or if they find something in this post-conviction discovery that was deliberately kept hidden, then yeah, a new trial could happen.
It's crazy to think this case can be reopened after all this time.
And for Lassie's family, it must be incredibly painful to have all this dredged up again, all the uncertainty, the not knowing.
It's a reminder that even with a verdict, sometimes the search for truth, for justice, it never really ends.
This case, it really makes you think about the limits of our legal system, how new evidence, new technology, it can rewrite history.
And I think that's what keeps drawing people back to this story, the mystery, the questions that linger.
The fact that even after all these years, we're still trying to piece together what really happened to Laci Peterson.
It's a case that stays with you long after the headlines fade.
And it makes you wonder, if you were on that jury, what would you have decided?
Would you have been convinced by the circumstantial evidence, or would you have had doubts?
There are no easy answers in this case, but the questions themselves, they're worth asking.
They make us think, they challenge our assumptions, and that's what makes for a truly compelling deep dive.
A case that keeps us guessing, keeps us talking, even all these years later.
So to all our deep divers out there, keep those questions coming, keep exploring, keep digging for the truth wherever it may lead.
And remember, sometimes the most fascinating cases are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.